I'm experimenting with putting my screen up, but because I find that I just have this nagging neck ache. And it occurred to me, others may have known this a long time ago, but it occurred to me it's because I'm constantly looking down at the screen. So I put it up on some books, but no, I can't reach the keyboard. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do. Let's give it a try this way. First of all, I want to apologize for the last minute canceling last week. The flight that I was on to Seattle, I was going to teach from the airport. I was all ready to do it, find a quiet corner in our Palm Springs airport, but the flight was moved up, unable to do so. Apologize for that. Hopefully we'll be able to go through the rest of the summer without any cancellations. You have the text in the chat box if you didn't get it off of the email that we sent out, to remind everyone that we record each of these sessions. So if for some reason you can't be with us, then you can catch up the time before. They don't go out the next day. Sometimes it takes a few days. Want to welcome some new faces. I see Elizabeth here and Beth. There could be others if I missed you, but welcome. Or Hamid Bar is a pluralistic, a spiritual congregation in the desert of Palm Springs, Coachella Valley in California. So for us right now, it's 10 in the morning. For you, it may be 1. It may be filled with smoke and clouds coming in from the north, and we hope that that gets better soon. Right here, I love to say that our humidity is under 10%. Yesterday it was 7 or 8. And particularly that's to my friend Scotty Miller, who's with us, because his humidity is in Washington, D.C. is probably about 93%, I'm guessing. So pleased. The summer in Texas is a rough one as well. And our hearts go out to you. And we hope that the power grid holds for all those with us in Texas, and in France, the trouble in France with the police and the demonstrations. Also, our prayers go out to you, Sister Claire, and to the community, and that things may calm down and that justice may be found, a more just way of policing.
Thank you.
The rules of the game are, for those who are new, is that you can interrupt almost any time. Maybe I'll tell you just to let me finish my sentence. I can't always see the little hands that go up, so you can give that a try. But if not, just start to go like this or something. I've got everybody on screen right now. At some point, we're going to move to a PowerPoint. Yes, Richard, there will be a PowerPoint presentation today, because I know how much you love PowerPoint. And that's because
as long as I'm not doing it, I'm fine.
Okay, and so we've got some very, very wacky stuff that we're going to be covering today, and it's only the beginning, friends. This is the reason that I chose this chapter of Masechet Brachot, of tractate Brachot in the Babylonian Talmud. The most important thing to remember about our first 2 times, where we covered the Mishnah in the first time and a half, and then we began the Gemara, the Mishnah being the earlier traditions of the rabbis from around, oral traditions from the first few centuries of the Common Era that were written down in the beginning of the 3rd century, and then the Talmudic discussion, which we're going to go back to. Is the conversation right now is about blessings in a place, in other words, geographically dictated blessings in a place where miracles were done to the people of Israel. Now, lots of things were written in the Torah and reinterpreted by the rabbis. Many things that are written in the Torah were totally left out from the rabbinic writings because they were no longer applicable, because the temple was no longer standing, because the laws of purity and impurity did no longer applied, and also because of things that just changed, like death penalty and things like that. Romans weren't about to allow the Jews to do that. And that would also be assuming that the rabbis of the Talmud had some sort of leadership position, which they at least claim they had, that was reflected in history, especially vis-a-vis the Roman government, the occupational government. But the other side of that is there's lots of things that the rabbis added to our practice. For instance, not everybody knows that to light the Shabbat candles, which is such a sacrosanct custom amongst our people, is nowhere to be found in the Torah. It was dictated, or it was decreed by the rabbis of the Talmud to do such things. The Amidah, the 3 times a day silent devotion is something that the rabbis invented, or people invented, but the rabbis brought into the norm. This whole tractate of brachot, while it begins in the first chapter, which we didn't do, with the mitzvah, the commandment of reading the Shema Yisrael from Deuteronomy every morning and every evening, and that is a mitzvah, a commandment from the Torah. Blessings are not. Blessings are something that the rabbis created, or the rabbis endorsed, or the rabbis made obligatory. The blessings, again, especially if you're from a traditional background, blessings which are so, so everyday. So the different kinds of blessings, we talked about that already. For today, though, we're going to go to this particular kind of blessing over something you see in a place you're at, right? The Mishnah dealt with all sorts of blessings that you see of things in nature, things of miraculous, or that kind of are liminal between the typically natural and the almost supernatural. We'll talk, the Talmud will talk about that later on. But for now, just on that first section of the Mishnah, the Talmud is opening up the discussion as to what about these blessings on places of miracles. Now, you're going to notice the Gemara, the Talmud, does not explore every aspect of the Mishnah. Is it because certain aspects were clear to whoever was editing this discussion? Is it because that only certain conversations were preserved in the memory? We don't really know. And sometimes something we would like to be clarified in the Mishnah is not. But the first thing that we started off with, that we began last time, we're going to go back to the beginning. So we're going back to the beginning of these sheets, okay? The sheet that at the top says Babylonian Talmud Brachot 54a to b. Is the issue, the whole matter of blessing, making a blessing in a place where miracles happened to the people of Israel. And although it's clear that the rabbis decreed this blessing and that it need not be found in a biblical verse, a verse from the Torah, still the Talmud wants to root this or connect this to something which is written in the Torah. And that's what we have in the first section here. So if I could ask you, Sister Claire, if you could read the first section. We did this last time 2 weeks ago. We're going to build a little bit steam, so we go into the next section, which is a little bit more complex and harder to understand, believe, I would say. Let's go ahead from where it says Gemara. Gemara, once again, is the Amoraic, that is the later strand of Talmudic writings from the 3rd century to the 6th century, more or less. Go ahead.
Gemara, from where are these matters derived? Rabbi Yohanan said, the verse states, and Jethro said, "Blessed be the Lord, who delivered you out of the hands of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh, who delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians."
Okay, so the proof text, if you will, it's proof texts are very often when it says to do a particular commandment and to do it a certain way, the rabbis say, well, that's why it was worded this way and that way. Here, again, this is not a commandment, one of the 613 commandments to say a blessing, but Rabbi Yochanan does want to connect it with something. And it's really interesting with whom he connects this. He connects this to Yitro, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, Tzipporah's father, who was not only, I can't do this. I told you before that I was going to try to, this is 3 years worth of getting used to looking down. So I have to figure out something else for my neck. So Jethro comes to the people of Israel. This is before the theophany at Sinai, comes to the people of Israel, meets up and says, I heard what happened. This is like fantastic. Everything that God, that Adonai did for you folks, for your people, Jethro says to Moses, this is something, and what are the words that are in particular that are used? Baruch Adonai asher hitzil etchem miad Mitzrayim. That Jethro says, Baruch Adonai, praised is God, is Adonai. Now, is that the exact same language of Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, which is the formula for the blessing that is implied in all of our texts here? Yes, I know in the Mishnah it did not have it spelled out, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Asher Asani Sim Lavotenu B'Makom Hazeh, that whole formula. But most of the poskim, that is, most of the rabbinic authorities that made rulings on what a Jew actually does, that is the halacha, assumed that that's what was intended here. They just didn't want to write out the whole blessing, maybe because of God's name, maybe because there's only so much room and so much ink that the scribe can write down. Although there are those that say, you should know, there are those that say we don't say the whole formula of the blessing. But back to this. So the proof text is from Jethro, and when I say it's interesting, which I mentioned last time, I'll emphasize again, is because he's not from Unzure, right? He's not from Unzure. He's not from us. He's not from us guys, right? He's not only is he a foreigner, he's a Midianite, and we get into trouble with Midianites afterwards. But he's the priest of Midian, Kohen Midian. He's the religious authority or religious leader of another religion. And he comes in and he gives us something new. He's as if the Talmud is saying here, Jethro, the non-Jew, the Gentile, taught us how to say blessings. Now, it's not exactly what it says. And again, but still, there's an implication here for someone like me who is constantly looking for ways to break down the barriers that Jews have built around themselves and others have built around Jews. It's been reciprocal for most of our history and changed really only in the 20th century, the second half of the 20th century. To me, this is an important source to show this kind of cross-influence of what might happen. But that's moving far ahead of time. Another interesting aspect that I think I neglected to mention last time is if the Mishnah was compiled around the beginning of the 3rd century, let's say 210, 250, we don't know, 210, 220, this wasn't said until, I'm sorry. No, I don't want to say that. What I want to say is that, no, I just want to say that Rabbi Yochanan, who lived at the end of the 2nd century towards the middle of the 3rd century, is no longer thought to be one of the rabbis of the Mishnah, but he's commenting on it. Okay, so this is Rabbi Yochanan, the beginning of the Talmudic period. Very, very, we'll find him all over the Talmud, and an authority of in the Babylonian Talmud mentioned often, although he himself is living in the land of Israel. Okay. Comments or questions on this small section, and maybe I'll talk less about the next one so that we can get something done today. Okay. Malka, would you like to read the second paragraph for us?
For a miracle that occurs for the multitudes, we recite a blessing. But for a miracle that befalls an individual person, we do not recite a blessing? Wasn't there an incident where a certain man was walking along the right side of the Euphrates River when a lion attacked him? A miracle was performed for him and he was rescued? He came before Rabbi, who said to him, every time that you arrive there, recite the blessing, blessed who performed a miracle for me in this place.
Okay. So this is this kind of back and forth, this rhetorical question. What you've only told me in the Mishnah, says the Talmud, you've only told me about these public, these national, these ethnic kind of miracles. For these communal or these, for the general population. How about for an individual? You didn't tell me anything about that. It's almost sarcastic. It feels, maybe it's not, but it sounds to me a little bit sarcastic. You forgot to tell me, how about that? Don't we know about a story of that one guy? Now, before we go into the story of that one guy, something that I mentioned last time is that one way to decide what to do, what is the halacha, what is the ruling on what we do in life, is to base it on a verse. Now, does that mean that they didn't know what to do and they opened up the Torah and they started to look at verses? Oh, this is what we do. We don't know what we should do, but we just read the Torah portion about Jethro. Oh, I guess we should be saying blessings as well. Maybe there are cases like that. We call that a midrash yotzer, a creative midrash. But in most places, we're talking about a midrash. It's not yotzer, midrash. I was going to say it's not tomech, a midrash mekayeh, maybe. I forgot the Hebrew term, but it's a midrash which is a supportive midrash. In other words, we already do what we do. Now let's look for some basis for that in scripture, in the Torah. That's one way. Another way in all legal systems is to look to precedent, right? And the precedent might be a story. In this case, in the Talmudic law, there's a lot of stories, not only in the Talmud, but later on in halachic literature, there often will be, well, we have a ruling passed down from this rabbi to this rabbi, but I know for a fact that I saw this great rabbi do something else. That's considered to be basis for that. That is a halachic precedent, right? Not just a precedent from a court case or from a legal ruling, but how somebody acted. And the Talmud is filled with those kinds of things. So we have an incident or a particular story about a person. Doesn't matter who the person is, right? Doesn't because that would be missing the point. And where is he walking? On the right bank of the Euphrates River. So the right bank, like in the left bank. By the way, I never understand that in Paris. Claire, maybe you can explain this. I never understood what's the right bank and the left bank is. Doesn't it depend on which way you're facing? So
no, it depends on the way the current is running, right? So it's the left bank. If you're facing in the direction that the stream is running, that the river is running, that defines what the right and left bank is.
Silly
in
me.
Paris, at least.
Silly me, all these years going to Paris, and I think I never had the courage to ask the question because everybody, or maybe that's why I never met people on time, because they told me in the right bank, the left bank, and I had no idea what they're talking about. In any case, that I'm reminded of that here. Many of some of the Talmudic commentaries here, and when I prepare, I'm looking at commentaries that are anywhere from the 11th century to even the 20th century. Steinsaltz is a very popular commentary that is really the easiest one to use. When you look in Sefaria at the translation, there's probably different ones you can set, but the default, I think, is a Talmudic translation, and you have the words of the Talmud in English in dark letter, in bold letters, and the words that are not in bold letters are part of the English translation, which is a paraphrase of the Talmud, adding all sorts of words, because the Talmudic language is very telegraphic, very staccato. And I think that translation is based on the English Steinsaltz. And that's Steinsaltz, Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, who passed away a few years ago, was a scholar who brought Talmud first to Israelis, who were not necessarily skilled or not trained in yeshivas. When you go to yeshiva, you're trained in learning the Aramaic or the Aramaic/Hebrew Aramaic of the Babylonian Talmud. And that's hard, especially for Israelis, because they look at the page and they see Hebrew characters and they say, I don't understand what this is talking about. And that's a huge turnoff. That's what I learned early on in my rabbinic career in Tel Aviv, especially working with secular Israelis, that not to bring passages in Aramaic, because people who are very, very smart, intelligent, they look at this and they say, well, I don't understand this. This must be nonsense. It's a kind of a psychological thing. Steinsaltz bridged that gap. And then it was later translated into English, and there are other English versions as well. But Steinsaltz, 20th century, an important commentator, although most of my time spent on commentaries would be with Rashi. In this case, I'm looking at Marasha a lot. Maybe we'll talk about them at a different time, because that's also the interesting part of the Talmud. The page of Talmud, a traditional page of Talmud, as some of you have seen, has all sorts of commentaries around the side and in the back of the volume as well. But one of the commentaries here says, at least one, maybe two, say that the right side of the Euphrates is actually the name of a place. Right bank, the right bank of, and it doesn't say, by the way, the text doesn't say Euphrates here. That's added on into the text. So it's the name of a place. Doesn't really matter, but it's something referring the Talmudic. The author is bringing the editor of the Talmud is bringing a tradition of a story that people seem to know. Otherwise, well, maybe not. In any case, we have this story, and this is what happened. Okay, now what happened to him? He was attacked by a lion. Are there lions on the banks of the Euphrates? I don't know. I didn't look. I didn't really find out. not really sure that's really the point of all this for us to figure out, are these realistic? We're going to get to some super unrealistic things in a few minutes, so that's why I'm not sure we should bother too much with it. But one way or another, this man had a personal miracle, Now, if we pause for a second, and all of us think of our lives, I think we could probably say that most of us, if not all of us, have had a personal miracle, right? It's the car accident that nothing happened. It's the terrorist attack that happened in the bus that I was just on an hour before, 10 minutes before. It's all these kinds of things that we, at least in our understanding, is a personal miracle. If other people around and see it, it makes it even more, it elevates it even more. Seems that we have a case like this, and he didn't know what to do. This individual didn't know what to do. So he comes to Rava, who lived from 280 to 352, more or less. I'm not sure the dates are exact. We doesn't matter how we know dates. We have one particular document from the Gaonic period that gives us dates, or is a way for us to figure out the dates. But let's say right now, from the end of the 3rd to the middle of the 4th century. And Rava is all over the Gemara, all over the Talmud as well. And he asks Rava, and Rava says to him, every time you come to that place, you stop and you say the blessing that Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shasa nisim li b'makom hazeh, or shanasa li nes b'makom hazeh. God performed a miracle for me in this place. I think what's most striking about this is we often think of prayer in the Jewish tradition as being communal and fixed, especially since the advent of the printing press and the prayer books we have, and we don't think of necessarily of saying a blessing which is totally about us. Now, yes, we say Shechianu, and that was mentioned in the Mishnah. For those that don't know, that's the blessing of mindfulness, that we have arrived at this particular place at this moment, when a baby is born, when there's a wedding, when you have a new suit of clothes, a new house, those kind of things. Those are very personal, but this one seems to be even more personal, because you have created a miracle for me in this place. It's very, very specific. As opposed to most of the we liturgy that we have. Just mentioning that, right? An example of the I liturgy as opposed to the we liturgy, for those that know the prayer book, is when we arise in the morning, Modeh ani lefanecha, or Moda ani lefanecha. I, not us, I thank you, God, for bringing back my soul, or it's a shortened version of Elohai, Nishama shenatata bi tohorai. My God, not Eloheinu, Elohai, my God, the soul which you have brought back to life this morning is very personal. And then we go through the day as we in liturgy. And then at the end of the day, we go back to a little bit of I liturgy before we go to sleep. Not the topic for today, but just to show that this is a bit of I liturgy. I just made up that term, I liturgy, like an iPhone, I liturgy. Okay. Comments or questions? Is there anybody who's done this, who said this blessing? I think
I really
go ahead.
I love just the mindfulness of the place and then tying that time and that place together in an overall, prayerful way. I think that's very sacred, very beautiful.
I was involved in a car accident very soon. Were we married? No, we weren't married. Yeah, I think we were married. Yeah, we were married, and it was at a particularly dangerous curve during a sandstorm, or right after a sandstorm, at the bottom tip of the Gaza Strip on our way to Yamit. I was on my way to Yamit. This was during the pullback from Sinai, and I was part of the Israelis who were demonstrating very on the other side of the lines of demonstrating that where I would be today if I was living in Israel. And I took a curve too fast, and I skid into the other lane, hit a car, not face, but at corner to corner. The car turned over, and thankfully Sasha was not in the car with me. And I can remember going by that particular place and pausing for a second with Sasha once and saying this blessing, because nothing happened to me, and the car was totaled. Okay, but I don't think it's something I've done often. I'm not sure I see things as miracles as much as perhaps I did in those days. Yeah, but something to think about. Certainly, again, mindfulness, geography, personal stories. Let's go on to another precedent, another story which comes to teach halacha. Dan, you want to read this one?
Okay, and once when Mar, son of Ravina, was walking in the valley of willows and was thirsty for water, a miracle was performed for him, and a spring of water was created for him, and he drank.
Okay, Valley of Willows is not just any old valley that happens to have willows in it. It comes up a number of times in the Talmud, and it was thought to be a dangerous place. There was no water, which is ironic because willows usually grow where there's a lot of water. Maybe that was somebody's sense of humor in those days. It was also a place where marauders were found. It was a dangerous place. Anyway, he's going down, and in this case, this is not just anybody, not an anonymous person. This is Mar, son of Ravina. Mar is the late 3rd century. Ravina, there's 2 Ravinas, or at least maybe there's even 3 Ravinas. Nomenclature, maybe I'm not using that word correctly, but names of rabbis, of sages in the Talmud are very tricky, and they're really tricky for me. They've always been a challenge for me, and remembering which generation, which place. But we're now amongst the rabbis of Babylonia itself, as the stories tell. We're not in the land of Israel, we're in Babylonia. We're in the relatively early period of the 3rd century, late 3rd century, beginning of 4th century. In any case, he's walking, there's a desert, and boom, a miracle, a spring of water was created for him. Reminds us a little bit of this last week's Torah portion, right? When Miriam dies and the people complain, there's no water. And so the rabbis understood from that all the years that Miriam was alive, as the Israelites wandered around the desert, the wilderness, a well or a spring, 2 different variations of that tradition, followed them everywhere they went until she died. Then it went away. It was no longer with us, and that gave birth to the custom that some of you know, to have Miriam's cup of water at the Seder table, for the Passover Seder table, right? Kind of the counterbalance of Elijah's cup of wine. Okay, so a personal miracle, and there it is, and he drank. Dan, go along, but not only that.
Furthermore, once when Mar, son of Ravina, was walking in the marketplace, Vistika, of Mechotza, and a wild camel, Gamla Peritza, attacked him. The wall cracked open, and he went inside it, and he was rescued.
Okay, now, if you thought that the miracle of the spring coming up, well, you could say, well, look at the wind blew, there was an earthquake, a crack in the water came out. You could explain it this way. This is a little bit more difficult, right? He's walking in the marketplace. Some of the commentaries say, well, he couldn't have been in the marketplace. Why would the camp? This is the kind of stuff that you study when you're in yeshiva, right? The truth is, you don't spend so much time on these kinds of things, but because this is half halacha, half agadah, right? It's not exactly legal stuff, but the idea that how exactly could it happen? It kind of goes back and forth. So he wasn't exactly, maybe he wasn't in the marketplace. He was near the marketplace. Doesn't matter though. A crazy camel. It happens. Camels go crazy. And when a camel goes crazy, I imagine it like when a horse goes crazy, or when a donkey goes crazy, an animal that goes crazy and is bucking and whatever. So he's so dangerous. What happens? He's got nowhere to go. The point is to say that he was in the marketplace and that he was in the narrow alleyways. Imagine the marketplaces of Jerusalem, if you will, or of Marrakesh, or wherever you think, perhaps in a small town in Mexico. This is not your shopping mall, right? You're in these small alleys. So how does he get out of it? The wall magically opens up. Some say it crumbled, but I think that the idea is the wall opens up so he can quickly go inside. He can, it's like in all the action movies and the superhero movies, whatever happens, there's some huge explosions about to happen, and suddenly there's a little niche where our heroes can go and hide and weather the storm. So Mar Ravina, he had a charmed life, I guess, right? Certainly he was one who was looking to explain the situations in his life as being protected by God. And in these two cases, these are the two cases in the background. Finally, Dan, the end of this particular section.
Whenever he came to the willows, he recited.
I'm sorry. The word can be translated when, but I think it could also, I think in this case, it might be whenever. They're not exactly the same. Maybe they are the same in English, but to me, it's not when as one particular point in time in his life, but whenever he passed by. So that's why the ever with a question mark. It could be translated both ways. Go ahead.
Whenever he came to the willows, he recited, "Blessed who performed a miracle for me in the willows and with the camel." And whenever he came to the marketplace of Mechotza, he recited, "Blessed who performed a miracle for me with the camel and in the willows."
So how do you understand that, Dan?
Well, the place calls to mind the first the thing that's associated with it, and secondly, all the times God has favored him with a miracle.
Right. So it's not just this time in my life. This comes together with all that God has watched over me in my life. That's maybe I'm reading a little bit too much into it, but otherwise, why give us this? Why do we, I'm not sure, but I think, Dan, that's the way I understand it as well. Any other possible understandings or questions on this whole section?
I do. Above, they say who performed the Manas b'makom hazeh, but here he gives the specifics. Why not just say who performed a miracle for me in this place?
So that's a good question, Malka. I think this is offering a different view. Very often in the Talmud, there'll be Rabbi so-and-so says this, Rabbi so-and-so says something a little bit different or the opposite. And then a third view. What I find in the Talmud is very often a story or a paragraph will not say, sometimes it says, no, we have a different view that says this. Very often we'll see that. In this case, I think the editor has juxtaposed these two traditions to show there are two ways of saying this blessing. One is generic and one is specific, or in this case, very specific. That goes back to what you and I have been talking about over the last few months about liturgy and how it changes from place to place, from authority to authority. There is this image, this idea that was, I ran into it when I grew up in the conservative movement, liberal conservative movement, as many of you know, and I became Orthodox when I was 14. And so I was in Orthodoxy for about a decade or so, maybe a little bit more. And what I found was the ongoing polemic against liberal Judaism in Orthodoxy was, this is ruining Judaism for the generations, whatever. And I'm talking about 50 years ago, and I'm sure it happened beforehand. And one of the claims was the changes to the prayer book. If you do that, you're tearing down this structure that it's always been. You'll see even online today, somebody says, well, how could you change something that hasn't changed since Avraham Avinu or from Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Since biblical times. That's not my understanding. And the more that I studied from an academic point of view, the more I realized that these ideas of what the tradition is, and in this case, what liturgy is, were fixed, and they really weren't fixed. And a lot of that has to do with the printing press, as I've mentioned already twice today, perhaps. A lot of it just has to do with our lack of knowledge of all the different things that are going on in the Jewish world. Is it completely different? No. The governing thing, at least until the 19th century, when when a lot of this unraveled because of secularism, reform movement in Judaism, but at least until the early 19th century, a religious Jew would say a blessing when a miracle happened to them. Now, did they say it this way or say it that way? So to my mind, Malka, I love it. It gives us options. So we get to go where we feel is more appropriate for us. I think you wanted to say something, Elizabeth? No, okay. Anybody else? All right, now this was nothing, folks. Now we get to the really good, the juicy stuff now, okay? So Harold, why don't you read for us? We had a Mishnah from the 1st century of the Common Era. It was discussed by an editor who brought us different traditions from the 3rd, 4th century, or maybe there were traditions later, but told about things that happened in the 3rd, 4th century. Now we go back to the times of the Mishnah. How do I know? For 2 reasons. Number one is, if you look in the Hebrew, for those that can read the Hebrew, it says Tanu Rabbanan. Actually, that's Aramaic, but it's a formula in the Talmud that introduces what we call a braita. A braita is an Aramaic word that means outside. It's a non-canonical tradition. So if you're thinking in terms of biblical writing scripture, there's the scripture agreed upon by the canon, and then there's the other books that we know are out there, whether everybody goes in whatever they grew up with. The other books that are out there from the same period of time, but they're not part of the canon. So not exactly the same as scriptural canon, but that's the best analogy I can think of right now. The Mishnah is canonical. Then there was another corpus called the Tosefta, which we'll refer to from time to time. That is the additional traditions. And in the Tosefta and in the Talmud, planted here and there, are these other traditions from the same first few centuries of the Common Era. And one might see them as being alternative. In this case, I think we'll say, we understand why the Mishnah, why the editor of the Mishnah didn't include it. But let's see, Harold, why don't you go ahead and read? Oh, the other reason we know that they're earlier material is because the language. If those of you who know Hebrew, you'll be able to follow this language much easier than if you don't know Aramaic than the sections before, because the Hebrew here is the most similar to modern Hebrew. The reason for that is when Ben Yehuda and his friends began to create modern Hebrew, they went back to the easiest form of Hebrew. Biblical is not the easiest form. Modern Hebrew is not that close to biblical. It's close compared to other languages, but modern Hebrew is the closest to the Hebrew of the Mishnah. And when Maimonides wanted to rephrase or to paraphrase the Babylonian Talmud in a different order of that all the laws should be found in a more rational or logical way, the language he used was the language of the Mishnah. So that's the language, that's the layer of Hebrew that we have here in the development of Hebrew. Go ahead. Our sages taught.
The sages say, on a miracle performed on behalf of the multitudes, everyone is obligated.
No, sorry.
I thought we had just finished talking about camels and willows.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'd skipped ahead. You're right. Go ahead.
Okay.
So forget everything I just said. The introduction is for the next paragraph. I apologize. This section is in Aramaic, okay? And this is kind of a summing up of this section. Go ahead.
The sages say, on a miracle performed on behalf of the multitudes, everyone is obligated to recite a blessing. On a miracle performed on behalf of an individual, only the individual is obligated to recite a blessing.
Okay, and this is kind of a summing up. And the truth of the matter is we got to this last time, I know, but I feel I didn't explain well enough the section before. Now we get to the explanation, the part that I explained before. And Harold, why don't you go ahead and read this section from this particular braita.
Sages taught, one who sees the crossings of the Red Sea and the crossings of the Jordan and the crossings of the streams of Arnon, the hailstones of El Gavish on the descent of Beit Horon, the rock that Og, king of Bashan, sought to hurl upon Israel, and the rock upon which Moses sat when Joshua waged war against Amalek and Lot's wife, and the wall of Jericho that was swallowed up in its place. On all of these, one must give thanks and praise before God.
Okay, so a virtual tour of ancient Israel. Steve, you've taken groups to the Holy Land to see the sites of the New Testament, and you'll point out this is where this happened, this is where this happened. I'm guessing that most of these places were not on your agenda.
Yeah, maybe the Red Sea crossing, and the crossing of the Jordan, sure.
Yeah, all right. So crossing of the Jordan, perhaps there are places that are traditional here. And I actually prepared a kind of a presentation about this, but I think maybe we'll go ahead with the Talmud first, and if there's time left over, we'll look and see some of the things. And we're going to revisit a lot of these places. The next page or few pages of the Talmud will go into detail as to what happened in these particular places. What's clear is that the person who uttered this tradition, who preserved this tradition orally, the people he was talking to, they were all kind of nodding to themselves. Oh yeah, we know that place. Oh yeah, we know that place. Or they could imagine that place. All right. And the idea here is that the land of Israel, in this case, the surrounding land of Israel, is filled with reminders of God's presence in the history of Israel. And I think that's what's hovering above all this. Yes, Elizabeth.
They don't give a particular formulation of how you're supposed to give thanks. Does that come later on, or?
I think it goes on what's.
Or you just improvise.
No, I think it goes on what's written in the Mishnah, that Shasa Nisim Lavotenu Bamakom Hazeh, that God performed miracles. Yeah. I think that's what's assumed here. This is added on, and the Talmud says, well, you need to go back and think of the Mishnah. So we actually could have gone back to the first page of the first time to see that. But yeah, that's a good question. But no, it's not a specific thing. It's although we're going to get to some specific instructions when it comes to Lot's wife. Okay, but let's see now where the Talmud was challenged by this. All right, and you always know when the Talmud is challenged when it starts with the term bishlama, right? Granted, okay, I understand. You got to go, I understand when you say this, but how about this? Okay, and that's what we have now. Would you like to read, Elizabeth? Are you up for reading?
You want English, right?
Yes, please. Yes.
Granted, the crossings of the sea, as it is stated, and the Israelites went into the sea on dry land, and the water was a wall for them on their right and on their left. So too, the crossings of the Jordan, as it is stated, the priests who bore the ark of God's covenant stood on dry land within the Jordan, while all Israel crossed on dry land until the entire nation finished crossing the Jordan.
Okay, so we understand, says the editor of the Talmud, when you come and tell us that you have to say a blessing at these two places, because everybody knows those two places. Let's just take a sidebar for a second about those two places. The servitude of Egypt ends not when the plagues happen, and not even when the Israelites escape. It's only when they get past the parting of the sea. That is the real end of the slavery in Egypt. And that is the beginning of what we call an inclusio. That's the beginning of the wanderings of the desert. And what is the end of the wanderings of the desert? When they get to the shores of the Jordan River, and this is a passage that not everybody knows because it's not in the Torah. It's not in the weekly Torah portion. It's in the book of Joshua, that they went into the water. The priest went inside, and there's different traditions. It's a little bit multiple traditions in this section of Joshua as to what happened. Representatives of each of the tribes. In any case, the ark goes in the water, and instead of the water piling up on both sides, like we know from the Charlton Heston movie or the Cecil B. DeMille's movie, and those that grew up in LA and went to Universal Studios when that was like the coolest thing that they had there was when the bus goes through the parting of the sea on both sides. Unlike the parting of the sea on both sides, here they're going across the river, right, to their right on their right hand side is north, and on their left hand side is so the water's flowing from the north. The water doesn't flow up into walls like this, only a wall on their right hand side. I know this probably comes out opposite for you, maybe anyway. And only the wall on the right hand side, because it's only flowing. It's not an ocean, it's flowing. And what the biblical editor has done in these two things, or at least the biblical tradition, is to show this passage through water into the 40 years of danger, of peril, of death, and then the 40 years of the new stage of Israel conquering the land. All right, that's kind of what's being. So that's in the background. That's the understanding. This for me is an interesting aspect of Talmud that I would have never thought of when I was in yeshiva. When I went to Israel, I went to a yeshiva high school in LA, an Orthodox yeshiva high school for 11th and 12th grade, had a lot of Talmud there. Then I went to Israel and was in a 5-year program, Army and yeshiva program for 5 years. And that was a lot of Talmud study. I would have never thought about this at that point, that this is the Talmud's showing an understanding of the basic structure of the wilderness stories. That I only learned afterwards when I got to the Bible department at Hebrew University. So that to me is, I smile at that there's some wisdom there that I wouldn't have seen beforehand. But what the Talmud is saying is that we understand those things. Those are stated explicitly, or steht mefurish, as you would say in Yiddish about this Talmud. It's steht mefurish. It's explicitly stated. We understand that. But now, as Elizabeth will continue to read, how about these other cases? We don't know anything about these other cases. What miracles are you talking about? Go ahead, Elizabeth.
However, from where do we derive the miracle that occurred at the crossing of the streams of the Arnon? As it is stated, quote, wherefore it is stated in the book of the wars of the Lord, Vahev in Sufa, and the valleys of Arnon, and the slope of the valleys that incline toward the seat of Ar and lean upon the border of Moab. Numbers
Okay.
21.
So we're going to take a break for a second. I'm going to interrupt you a few times here. To anybody, if you were to open up your Bible to that section, your Torah, that section right now, you'd read through and you say, what's going on here? With translation, without translation, with commentary, without commentary. It's a section of the Torah which has reached us deficient. It's not, something happened to the text. There's some words that are missing there. Any modern commentary will tell you that. And whenever you have something like that, which is difficult to understand, that is an occasion for a rabbinic party, I'll call it, for a Talmudic party. They go, wow, we'll explain this to you, and you'll see in a second you don't know what that means? We'll tell you exactly. The text doesn't mean what you thought it meant. It really means something very, very different. So that verse, those two verses in Numbers are problematic verses. What they seem to be telling, an interesting thing, which is not connected to our Talmud here, is the Torah quotes another literary source, right? The Book of Wars of Lord. That's interesting because that is not a book that we have. But aside from that, it talks about a war. Now, Arnon, I'm going to show you in the PowerPoint where Arnon is on the map. Okay, we're on the other side. If you think you're looking at the map of his, you know what? Hold on. One moment. No, sorry. Thought I still had it on board. I must.
Is it a map you're looking for?
No, I'll show a map in a second. It's a particular map from a biblical atlas. But we'll go back to it, okay? But trust me, it's a wadi. Arnon is a what do you call a river that flows a perennial? I think it's the word is. It's a river that flows all year round, which is unlike most of the rivers in the Middle East, not just when it rains. And it's rather wide, and it has tributaries coming into it. It flows from the east westward into the Dead Sea. Think of about halfway up the coast of the Dead Sea. Okay, so we'll see it on a map in a few minutes. I think we'll have time. But go ahead. What happened here?
It was taught Vahev in Sufa. These were 2 lepers who were walking at the rear of the camp of Israel.
Okay, and I have to say, sorry, I'm sorry. So I have to say it is Vahev is understood here as and Hev. His name was Hev, and I'm sorry. So the translation is not good here. It should have had there's 2 guys. One's name is Et, and the other one is Hev, and there is Et Vahev and Sufa. So it's
Et Vahev in Sufa.
okay. It should be Et Vahev and Sufa. That's my mistake there. And these two guys named Et and Hev, who we have no mention of in the Torah whatsoever, they were lepers, meaning they had sarat, not leprosy, but they had sarat, and they couldn't be walking in the camp because they were impure. So only 2 out of the 2 million that were walking, they couldn't be in either the priestly camp, the Levitical camp, or any part of it. So they're walking behind the line. They're the schleppers at the very end. Go ahead.
As Israel passed, the Amorites came and prepared caves for themselves, and they hid in them. They said, when Israel passes here, we will kill them. But they did not know that the Ark of the Covenant preceded the Israelites and would flatten mountains before them. When the Ark came, the mountains adhered one to another and killed them. I presume that means the Amorites. And their blood flowed down to the streams of Arnon.
Okay, so look at my hands for a second. You have a wadi, right? You have a canyon, and so the Israelites are walking forwards. Well, the Shekhinah, the presence of God's presence is with them because the ark is with them, and the ark does miracles. So as the ark walks first, right? Remember from our prayer liturgy, Vahi bin Sa'aron Vayomer Moshe, whenever the ark would be lifted, would begin to move. That's when the people of Israel moved, walking after the ark. So as they would come forward to make it easier for them, the canyons would come together and all the mountain flats would stop. It's like this huge bulldozer is going forward and creating a path for them, a wonderful path for them. Now, in the meantime, the Amorites thought, oh, we're going to hide in the caves and the canyons and we'll ambush them as they come through. But of course, as the ark moves forward, all these canyons come together, and the people inside of them, they get totally squished and squashed, and then they're walking through, and then as the camp goes by, the canyons open up again, and these 2 schleppers at the end, they see all this blood flowing down. This is so bizarre, this whole thing, right? The blood is flowing down out of the caves into the canyon. That's this, as my teachers Shenan and Zakovich used to say, that's this twisted rabbinic memory here. It's a little bit twisted here, okay? But it comes to explain a difficult text, and it also comes to tell us why, if you're ever in the area of Nachal Arnon, of Wadi Arnon, you have to say a blessing because this is what happened. This is the backstory. Right, the true version. And those of you that have studied Midrash, you know this is all over the place. When you come at biblical studies from a Christian point of view, very often this is like, but that's not in the text at all. That's totally reading into the text. Yeah, we do it all. Rabbis did it all the time. It's just it's in the background. So we still have to explain the last part of it. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
When Et and Hev arrived, they saw the blood that was emerging from between the mountains, and they came and told Israel and the people, and the people recited a song as it is stated, quote, and at the cascade of the brooks that goes down to the dwelling of Ar and lies upon the border of Moab.
So all
That's
the-
end quote. So that's a quote from Numbers.
Right, so this is all in the land of Moab, so it explains this strange little poem that's in there, okay? If you like, you can go back there and see if you can come up with a better explanation. It's a difficult text, but all this is, the Talmud is bringing, it's Agadah, not halacha, there's not rulings as to what we do, but Agadah, traditions that have to do with filling in the gaps in the biblical story, things that we believe, things that we think, and then you have to say, so what do we get out of this? What is this? I mean, if you're with your children or your grandchildren and you happen to be in Jordan, you go by, do you really want to tell this to your 5-year-old grandson, right? Or your 6-year-old granddaughter? Really, is this the story you want to tell? Well, my guess is most of us probably don't, and we would wait until they're in their teenagers and we want them to think that we're cool and we know a story like this. Maybe it's kind of an Indiana Jones kind of a thing. But when you're a people who are constantly attacked for who you are, and more often than not, where you lived in the world, there was some problem because you were Jewish. That's not my view of all of Judaism. You know that Jewish history, but we know it's out there. And where Jews are powerless when it comes to physical force and violence, very often, these are the stories that help lift up one's spirits. It's like the story of Purim, right? The plagues around the table until second half of the 20th century, and that only in certain liberal homes. Everybody would love the plagues when you recite the plagues. Yeah, we'll show them. God, show them. Look at that! Boom, boom. I think many of us have backed away from some of that stuff now, but it's very much needed in a world where that is a problem. Any comments or questions?
I just wanted
Yeah,
to
go ahead.
ask what they did with the Insufa. That sort of Sufa sort of gets,
So
they don't explain it.
so Sufa is a place name here, okay? Suf,
Oh, okay.
as you may know, Yam Suf can mean reeds, but here it's a great question. I made a note and I forgot to say it. Sufa here is understood as Sof, as their end. God brought about the end of the Amorites that way, right? Their end. A play on words there. Any other comments or questions?
I also thought that the way the rocks parted and came together over them was sort of reminiscent of what happened at the Red Sea.
It is. It's also reminiscent, by the way, of what happened millions of years ago. If you've ever had a tour of Israel in the Jordan River Valley, which is part of the African European, I forgot the name of it. There's a geological name of the formation. You can see with the tour guides will show you, especially on a map, but even if you're in the middle, how the two parts were together at one point in time and they split. So much so you can see what's opposite what, more or less. So I don't think they knew about that then, but yeah, very much. And so let's take a look at some of those things now. In the meantime, go ahead and ask it as I bring up this this PowerPoint that I prepared, if you have any questions. I understand we're at 11 o'clock now, and if folks don't have time to stick around, just let me know and I'll send this to you. So the first place is, and I can't see you now on the screen, so if you want to say something, just speak up. The first thing is here, this is where, this is if they knew where the parting of the Red Sea was, most of us thought, can people see this?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, let me just make it bigger. Okay, most of us always thought that the parting of the Red Sea must have been down here or maybe here someplace.
I just see the PowerPoint page. I don't see it says Bob
Me
Lieber.
too, I just see a list of pages.
That's all
Yeah,
I
just
see of the
him,
pages.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on just a second. Let's start again. How about this?
Okay,
Better.
good.
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, State of Israel, as today, Jordan or Moab is here, Egypt is here, the Nile Delta, the Suez Canal, remember, much of that had to be dug, but there was always been water here. So many people would say that the parting the Red Sea was really the, shallow waters here that they walked through. Other people thought maybe it's down here to get to Mount Sinai. This is the Sinai Peninsula, and Santa Caterina, which is in the Christian tradition, not all, but certainly the Orthodox Christian tradition, is where Mount Sinai was. The Bedouin tradition is that Mount Sinai was up here in a place called Jabal Musa. Some of you may know, my guess is less the Jewish folks here, more those that have know more what's going on in some of the Christian, especially evangelical circles. And if you happen to read in the New York Times, like last week or the week before, there was a piece on Saudi Arabian tourism, which is there's a whole Christian pilgrimage industry now of bringing people to Saudi, how do I get back to there? To Saudi Arabia. So you may know that some people have shown, and I'm going to show you a little video, that there's a few people that have really put forward that this is all Egypt, including the Sinai Peninsula. And when the Israelites left, they escaped through here, and they went to Mount Sinai, which is around here. Some Jabal Alaz is Mount Sinai, I guess, right? So they came through. There is a break in the cliff. Those of you that have been in the Sinai Desert and the Sinai coast, beautiful, beautiful area. Most of it is mountains that come up to the ocean. And there's a place, there's like a delta, a sand delta called Nueba. And so many people think that that is the place. Now, please, the disclaimer, I do not think that this is it. Not that I don't think this is it. I don't know. I'm not really concerned with it. It's just that I had heard about this, seen this over the years, but the first time I actually watched an entire video, hour and 15 minutes video, was yesterday to find these two passages for you folks. So I don't have rights to this. If you want to see more, you can look at this godslastwarning.com. I didn't go there, but I got it off of YouTube. And this is the here there. So let's take a look. This is Ross Patterson and a bunch of his friends. No, that's not what we want. How do I get to? Oh, how come I'm not getting the video? You know what? Let me.
Do you want me to play it?
Yeah, if you could. It's not, I guess something, it didn't enable it, or.
The scattered, irregular coral formations on the Saudi side of Aqaba resemble those previously found off the Nuweiba Peninsula.
How are you doing?
Oh, can you hear anything?
No, because I'm still on my share. I guess I should stop share.
Oh, yes.
Oh. Go ahead. Try again.
The scattered, irregular coral formations on the Saudi side of Aqaba resemble those previously found off the Nuweiba Peninsula. In the midst of them, Pan Tien photographed this circular object attached to what appears to have been a broken axle or hub. This discovery was significant for two reasons. Pan Tien had documented the coral-encrusted form of a wheel with dimensions similar to ancient Egyptian artifacts directly across from the proposed Nuweiba crossing site. Her find also provided independent confirmation of earlier evidence establishing wheel-like formations on both coasts of the Red Sea, in accordance with descriptions in the biblical record.
And the Lord looked down on the Egyptian army, and he made the wheels of their chariots come off.
Vivica recorded on a handheld global positioning system the exact location where she found the chariot parts on the Saudi coastline. And we were able to use her coordinates to set a direct course from the crossing entry point at Nuweiba to the opposite coastline where the Israelites would have exited to the shore.
Okay.
It is interesting to note that the
No,
course
enough
was
for
exact.
neither. All right, if you could just give me back the screens, the regular screen. So again, I'm not claiming this is it. If you want to go in that direction, that's fine. And here, look at that video. It's Harold, you might be interested in this. It's a lot to do with, these folks want to find, they start with the premise that everything in the Bible is true. It needs to be true. Therefore, everything they'll find in science and archaeology will make it be true. Not my way, but I understand. But I only bring it up now because for Jews at the time of the Talmud, if there was a tradition about a place, and we'll see that with Lot's wife, then that was reality for them. And it wasn't, but the thing in the rabbis of the Talmud, it was never about only what's written in the Torah. It's written in the Torah. It's what we know from the oral Torah, the other translations, and from what they knew. And then, and this is the more point, and then they say, yeah, but other people say other things. The other stuff, the other people say other things, which is also true. You are correct, you're correct, you're correct, is at the roots of Judaism the way we know it today. And that is at the roots of Pharisaic Judaism as the rabbis present themselves as the inheritors of Pharisees, of the Pharisees, and different than, say, one might the impression one might get from the Pharisees from the Gospels, for instance. And so this plurality of possibilities. And so Patterson, it's about, and his guys, it's about, no, this is what it means, and this is what we found. And I got to take my hat off to him. He does the scuba diving. He's totally into it. I'm wondering who's financing all this. That's the one thing. And good for the Saudis. They opened up their country a few years ago, and now they've got all this tourism, and so yeah, and it gives a lot of biblical tourism more options of where to go instead of the same old places. Okay, let me just see what else I wanted to show you about today. Okay, so this is Ma'abarot HaYarden, the crossings of the Jordan. You can see at the bottom, can people see the map?
Yes.
Okay, so at the bottom you can see the upper tip of the Dead Sea. All right, and so Jericho is a little bit up above that to the left. So somewhere around that. Now, do we know exactly where? Do we even know that it's historical that the Israelites wanted the desert? No. If you're asking me, no, we don't know that as history. I understand many people here may believe very much it is history, but according to this particular biblical atlas, this is the point where they crossed, and is known in the Christian tradition today. There's at least one point which people will show in Israel, but it's not a place of pilgrimage, right? Unlike graves or graves of sheikhs that have become graves of biblical personalities like Rachel's grave or whoever, that become places of pilgrimage. This is not a place of pilgrimage in Judaism today. And then finally, the Arnon, the story of Arnon. This is that river that I was talking about down here on the left-hand side. It flows into the Dead Sea, and this is what it looks like. In reality, you can imagine somebody knowing that Wadi and imagining to himself the Amorites lurking in the caves there. When it says they made caves for themselves, I think that the Aramaic there probably means they prepared themselves places for the ambush in the caves. I don't think it meant they dug out the caves. And then next week, I think we'll see this particular thing, and this is a good example of pluralism as well. This is the Israel sign in Israel towards Lot's wife. I will tell you that I believe this is the older one, This fell down at one point, and they soon found another one. These are salt or pillars in the caves, but you can imagine somebody at one point saw this, and this may have been around for hundreds of years. Josephus talks about Lot's wife, but this one over here, this is on the other side of the Dead Sea. Right? This is according to Islamic tradition, this is Lot's wife. And again, it's not about what was, and this is just a modern Israeli or a mid 20th century song about Lot's wife. If anybody wants this PowerPoint, let us know, or let Madalena know, or you know what? We will add it we'll add a link to it online onto this recording. Okay, Madalena, if you could do that for us.
Sure.
So I guess what I want to say with this final point of the multiple Lot's wives, I love that as well. It's not about, well, this is where it really happened, and this proves that the Bible is true. It is about, for me, what I read a biblical story, I look around myself, I said, oh, doesn't that remind me of that? Isn't that something? It's not about the truth. It's about using geography and where I am to make the text come alive. Those are different things. And if we ever do go to Israel together, a trip, that will be one of the questions that we'll constantly be asking ourselves when we get to some place. Are we here because we want to justify ourselves, what we know in our literary sources to be historically true? Or is there something else we'd like to learn from this place? And I'm hoping it's the something else. Parting comments or questions for today? Sorry to go over for so long. Okay, well, I told you it would be a wild ride today. I hope you were not disappointed. And I'll see everybody next Thursday. Thanks for being here, everybody.